everyone, it's Maddie.
And V, and today we're going to be reading The Beautiful by Renee Ahdieh.
This is exciting for BookTube because it feels like the first vampire book since Twilight that everybody is talking about.
I've previously read Flame in the Mist, but otherwise we don't know a lot about her writing style, so this is going to be completely fresh, basically.
And pretty much blind to what the book is about besides vampires and the fact that it's set in New Orleans.
We should also say that our vampire knowledge is Twilight, The Vampire Diaries, and Vampire Academy.
So we'll keep you updated as we read.
So we have just read the first 10%. So that means we have had 2 first-person perspectives from the male vampire, and then the rest of it is in third person, mostly focusing on Celine. Celine's French, and she is part of an entourage of 6 other girls who have gone to New Orleans to study in a nunnery. We also know that Celine has murdered someone. That's a little mystery. I'm sure that will unravel later on and she'll be able to sympathise with, I assume, her love interest being the vampire man, whose narration is just horrible. Like, I really, really don't like him. He's not this enticing thing that you want to get to know more about. He's just sort of like, eye roll, you want to be human. What vampire doesn't? Like, let's move on. I think it's a bit weird that we're hearing about his guilt immediately. He does kill a girl within the first 10%, but you don't see how he does it. He sort of reflects on it later on. And I think it's really weird to have his perspective be the first person, and then to have Celine, who's like the more predominant character so far, being third. His perspectives so far have been few and far between, and I only imagine they'll increase because Celine has recently accepted an invitation to make a dress for Odette, who I imagine is in a little shady business with the vampire guy, whose name we still don't know. There are 2 weird things also about Celine. One, that her name is Marceline. If she becomes a vampire at any point in this book, that's just ridiculous, because Marceline from Adventure Time is a vampire, and she is arguably one of the most pop culturally prevalent vampires out there.
If you think of vampire, male, Edward Cullen, female Marceline.
Exactly. The first 10%, I would go as far as to say, is dedicated to letting you know how big Celine's boobs are. Honestly, the amount of references to her corset straining, the girls even have one whole conversation about how well endowed and gifted she is, and it was just like, what's happening? Why is this important? So it better come up, it better be plot relevant, otherwise I'm going to be annoyed that we had to suffer through that for like 10%.
We're close to a quarter of the way through now. How long would you say it's taken us to read as well? I feel like it's quite quick.
Not long, maybe like 25 minutes.
When Celine was on her way to meet Odette, she had her first run-in with the vampire man, and we found out that his name is Sebastian, but it's commonly shortened to Bastian.
They just ran into each other.
Yeah, they just ran into each other. I can't remember the specifics, but they got like really close, and then suddenly they were in each other's faces, and I guess that means that they're attracted to one another because they wouldn't let go, and she was like very aware of his touch, and it felt very stereotypical, like 1970s romancy from what we read at university. Like, it reminded me a lot of those. And just like the turn of adding something erotic to romance, like the flame in the flower, I think it was reminding me a bit of that.
Yeah.
I definitely thought that Bastian's description reminded me a lot of how Heathcliff is described. I think it would have been more interesting if he wasn't tall, dark and handsome. Besides that, we have the inkling that Odette is also a vampire, and it's cool she dresses in both male and female fashion. We're not sure if this is a series or a standalone, but seeing as we are so far through and such little has happened, I would be surprised if it's a standalone. Actually, the other most significant thing is we learnt the circumstances which meant Celine had to kill someone. I'm surprised that that wasn't kept hidden for longer, but essentially she was just in a situation where somebody was on top of her and she used something as a weapon to hit him over the head to get him off of her and accidentally killed him. So it wasn't on purpose or anything, but it's definitely the kind of situation that she would be in with a vampire, so it will be interesting whenever that's mirrored later.
Yeah, so we've just encountered the next murdered girl. This time it's Annabelle, one of the girls from the convent who Mother Superior sent to spy on Pippa and Celine. What Maddie and I have decided is that it would be far too convenient if the first-person perspective was Sebastian, because we've already mentioned that we don't like him. And I imagine that's going to be a similar story to many people who read this book. It's not like the most pleasant character. It would be very weird to have your main love interest, your secondary character, be so hated immediately. So our guess is that this first person actually isn't Sebastian. It's another vampire, perhaps a rival clan, the head of like a rival vampire nation, and he's following the events that are happening between Sebastian and Celine, and he is also taking this liking to Celine. Like, there's no suspense in who killed the girls if you just immediately think, oh, it's Sebastian. No, you don't know it's Sebastian. What you know is that the first person narrator killed the girls. So I will be very pleased if we're actually right there, but it would also be a bit disappointing because it means we worked it out. Yeah, we guessed it.
In originally assuming that the first person was going to be the love interest, you're assuming that Sebastian is a vampire, Whereas he
I
couldn't
guess.
be. Like,
Yeah, maybe
if
he
this
might not
character
be.
is obviously a vampire, then maybe Sebastian isn't, and he just exudes, like, mysterious energy.
That's true, I hadn't thought of that. But Odette is probably a vampire.
Probably.
Again, we don't know that for sure, but...
Yeah. Also, I really like the idea of there being, like, a relationship between Odette and Pippa, because there was a statement about, like, Pippa not wanting to find a husband and how she had a reason for that she couldn't go into. There was a moment where Odette and Pippa, like, went off together to do something, so it would be really cool if they did something with that.
Let's cross our fingers then.
Yeah, exactly.
But you may be reading into it, I don't know.
Female vampires, like, that would be in the tradition of Carmilla, wouldn't it? It's not, like, out of the question.
True, very true, very.
We were also discussing how this is, like, a parallel to Dracula. How Celine is the Lucy character, Pippa is Mina, and then I guess Sebastian just has to be Dracula. Whether or not he's a vampire is now yet to be decided. But we were wondering when the kind of Van Helsing, is that his name?
Yeah, the vampire hunter, where
would
he's
come
going,
in.
yeah.
And he did turn up. He is the detective investigating the murders. We've reached the 50% mark. Our theory that Odette is gay
was confirmed.
Confirmed. And that's lovely.
I kind of, it made me just roll my eyes at Celine, though, where she was just, like, assumed that Odette's coming out was her coming on to her, and I was like, no! Odette being gay may have been the big build-up about how big Celine's boobs were, because
to get to this point,
because the conversation started with them talking about how corsets are so restrictive, and then Odette was just like, well, I don't wear one, and you don't have to, we should all burn them. And Celine was like, scandalised by this, so I was just like, somehow the logic was Odette doesn't wear a bra, that makes her gay, but whatever. It just makes her subversive in society in more ways than one.
Good that we sniffed that one out very immediately.
Yeah. At least this book has that going for it.
Yeah. We also had another theory about potentially the detective character being the first person evil vampire. I think that would be really good because it would put him in a position of power and means that he would have the ability to pin things on other people and kind of get away from situations.
The more we read, like, the less convinced I am that it's Sebastian.
Yeah, it 100% isn't. The third person was finally used to focalise Bastian for one chapter, whereas previously it had just been used for Celine. So the fact that that POV has been extended to him as well maybe suggests that he isn't the first person.
That's true.
Thinking about it on a structure point of view.
In terms of plot, like, not much has happened. We've got 50% left. And the biggest mystery is who is the first person narrator. And it doesn't really seem to be alarming the local community that girls are dying.
I'd say that. There's not much urgency with, like, finding out who it is. Yeah. And I think
even with the detective coming on the scene.
Yeah, and the first murder and the second murder were pretty much the same in terms of, like, gruesomeness. There was one clue dropped, potentially, I don't know, about the identity of the person or, like, a larger scheme of murders. But I want it to get more grisly.
So we've got 50% left. We're going to start doing some reading sprints now because I want to get to the meat and potatoes, which it still isn't giving me.
And honestly, it hasn't been that romance heavy, which is surprising. Like,
it's
really, obviously romance coded with the way that Bastian and Marcy, Celine, met for the first time. No big connection between them yet. Although they did have weird banter, and then Celine said, don't fall in love with me, or, like, try not to fall in love with me, and that made us laugh so hard. B was reading a bit quicker than me, and she just went, ew, and then I got to that bit and was like, is this what you oohed at?
I mean, I love that line of dialogue. I've used it in my own fan fiction, but you have to have more banter than, like, it was like the second time they'd met. They exchanged about 8 sentences towards each other, and then she was using it, and I was like, that's not, no.
At this point, I can definitely say that I prefer vampires in a modern setting than this historical one.
They've sort of come up with a plan to try and capture the first person perspective, who has some kind of little minion working for him, and I don't know whether it's clear, is the minion the one doing the killing? And they're doing a masked ball, because of course they are, and I've just got to a bit where Celine has left to be followed by Bastian. There was a moment where she was walking in the dark, and then, like, a creepy beast came after her, like, whispering, like, I'm gonna eat you, essentially, or, like, I'm gonna take you back and you're gonna be my queen. And it was just like, what? Why is this here? It felt very weird.
Why is he a ghost and not a real person?
Yeah, exactly. But again, that's just to mingle with the thing of, like, Bastian being called the ghost, the phantom at the very beginning. So this, like, evil spirit essentially came at her, and then he was there to stop it, and it was very Howl's Moving Castle, like the beginning, where he just, like, takes her by the hands and they're just walking along, and he's, like, rushing her away from these dark spirits. And so I don't know, because I had that in my mind. I was like, oh, I quite like this scene. This is nice.
We're in the last 10% of the book now, and the plot has just completely changed. So at first they were at a masked ball in order to trap the killer, and then suddenly Sebastian's uncle has become a large character. He turns up and essentially just says to Celine, I need you not to love my nephew because you're making him weaker, and it would be more convenient for me if that wasn't a thing, so you have to tell him that you don't love him. It's very Uncle Edgar from Ella Enchanted.
Is it not?
It is. And I don't really understand the necessity of this when there are more pressing things. Like, surely they should just be trying to catch the demon. I don't really understand how Celine's, like, ability to love has become important.
The other really annoying thing is that when Celine and Sebastian had their, like, sort of semi-I love you, like the pre-I love you chat, he was saying how he'd ruthlessly killed in cold blood and he enjoyed the sport of it. And she was just like, yeah, me too. And it's like, no, you killed for self-defense, you murdered your rapist, and you don't feel guilty about it because he was a horrible person. It's also like a big old trend in sort of paranormal / dystopian, isn't it, for the main female character to be saying, I'm a monster, I'm a monster. Got 10% left, and if the first person narrator is not killed before the end of it, or at least his identity revealed, I'm going to be fuming. We have now finished the book, so let's wrap up with our final thoughts. First, we should address the ending and the reveal of who the first person narrator was. It was a woman, which was a nice twist. However, the fact that she was a werewolf wasn't a twist really, considering there had been a few references to the fact that fairies exist in this world, and if fairies and vampires exist, then, like, I don't really know what the ramifications are for it. It's clearly going to have a sequel, one that I will not be reading because I'm not intrigued enough to continue. The final 20%. What a riot that was.
So we were a little bit confused really about who Bastian was. It turns out that he was never a vampire, and it was just his uncle and the people around him, and they were protecting him.
They didn't want to turn him into a vampire, like when he was like fatally injured by Nigel, who was a vampire and turned out to be evil. They didn't want to like turn him, Bastian, into a vampire to save him. So that was kind of a twist on the whole dance school ending of Twilight, where Edward has to like turn Bella to save her.
But for what
Maybe.
reason?
I don't know.
I really don't understand the reason. And then I thought they were going to do something where Nigel ended up being Celine's rapist, like there was a weird...
Oh, yeah,
like,
I almost thought there's
British
going to be too many coincidences.
Yeah, I think what makes a good mystery is that you're able to piece it together and see the clues.
I think as soon as Nigel started monologuing, I was like, this hasn't been explained well enough. Because if your villain needs to explain exactly the reasoning behind why they've done everything...
Because he had to say, she was like, oh, why are you doing this? And he had to say... motives? I have many motives, and then listed.
Do you?
And it was like, I did not see that coming, and
in a bad way.
In a completely bad way. That makes it a bad setup.
In a like, why? Hang on. What? They kept referencing some sort of brotherhood as well, which I think also stopped you from thinking that the murderer was going to be a woman, because brotherhood does not suggest that.
Yeah. Potentially would be interesting to go back now and read the first person perspective with that knowledge, because it's only a few chapters. Why am I more confused than anything? Like, the first, it was so clear, like the plot at the beginning was so clear, and then as soon as it got to 80%, it was just completely muddy.
It was like...
And maybe that's because it was like, you know, trying to stretch to get to a sequel, or like, you know, try and foreshadow something for later, but it just completely lost me.
Yeah, part of me was actually thought when I first read like that first person where it says, oh, I'm Emily DeLoop or whatever. Hang on, is this the same first person that we've had so far? I thought Nigel was that first person, and then we were randomly being introduced to another first person so that the second book could have a first person perspective to like match with the narrative structure of this one.
You know how earlier we were like, oh, why is it a ghost? Why does it not have a presence? Because I guess if it did have a presence, then it would have to say gender. It would have to describe the demon as, like, with a male or a female figure. So just describing it as a ghost means that you can do it without a body, and that would make the gender like a mystery
at the end. Clever in some ways, but also really frustrating in others. What I want to do now is read the blurb, because we didn't know that, so I want to know how this had been marketed. But I'm going to give it like 2.5.
I'm so maybe confused. And part of me is like, was I just reading it quickly, or did it just not make sense?
Yeah, because... I don't know. There was definitely a flurry of things happening at the end, and the plot was dithering, like between 30% and 60%. It was like, come on, Meat and potatoes. We read it in one
unfortunate.
sitting because I didn't want to have to pick it up again tomorrow.
Yeah, I think I'd settle on a similar rating. It's a 2-star book for me. It's fun to try and figure out like what I thought it would be, but the fact that what it ended up being was so far off the mark of what I had guessed, like trying to be a logical reader, made it really difficult.
It was fun that some of what we guessed actually turned out to be true, but it was also annoying that we weren't given more hints to be able to put it together.
So thank you everyone for watching this read-along review of The Beautiful by Renee Ahdieh.
If you've read it, let us know what you think in the comments, and we'll see you next time.